Bodybuilding with a purpose. We are building our bodies, minds, and spirit to achieve a level of holistic growth. It's not about aesthetics and looking good. That's just a byproduct of the intrinsic attention we give ourselves, overcoming all challenges in pursuit of our greatest desire. Bodybuilding with a purpose.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are around the world. It's your DFB Anchor Li. Today, I'm with a very, very special guest of mine, Alan from ShiftEQ Podcast. How you doing today, Alan?
First of all, thank you guys for having me, and
Yes.
I feel great, man. Like I feel like a kid on Christmas morning about open presents because I'm usually on the other side of
Yes.
this podcasting venture. So to be a guest instead of a host is it's unique for me, but it's pretty cool that it's happening. That's for sure.
Yes. No, thank you very much for giving us the time. Before we started this, we were like, wait a minute, let's record before we before we have a podcast without recording, right? That's just
Right.
the energy I feel today about all this. So, just give us a quick introduction, man, of who you are, what you do. I love your podcast that you've been putting out there. What's the inspiration behind all that?
Yeah. Thank you very much. So I'm Alan Kay. I am the host of the ShiftEQ podcast, just like my brother Elijah just mentioned. But for me, I did a lot of ventures in my life. I was coming from an adopted household, facing the discriminations of being Asian or not being enough, to being in the military, to going through divorce, playing poker for a living, going broke a few times, being a degenerate. Like, I'm saying all these different things because I went through a lot of different circumstances that helped me learn who I am and to challenge all of those inner beliefs where I didn't feel like I was enough. And I've realized that belief of not thinking you're enough, or that thinking that you have to have something in order for it to be someone, it exists in a lot of people, and more people than not. And so the point of the podcast, the purpose of the podcast, is to highlight that feeling and highlight that notion in not only myself, but other people that I meet along the way, and that display that into a way that can enable people to become better versions of themselves, to find stories that they can relate to. And I have found that it's a lot easier to inspire people to be a better version when they can relate to the stories rather than just be told, be better, be this. Like, no, someone from the same background went through the same kind of crap. Like, maybe it's not the exact same circumstance, but the
Yes.
feeling of not being enough, the feeling of feeling withdrawn, the feeling of having to do something to be someone, they all exist in everyone. And it's just, finding the triggers that can make it relatable so that people could take the initiative upon themselves.
No, wow. I love that perspective right there. Like you say, more relatable, right? I mean, just like the conversation we had earlier before, we hit the record button, right? People are like, oh, you got to find something that is more achievable, right? At every single level that we'll go through, right? Like, you can't
Right.
start bodybuilding today and, I want to be Chris Bumstead tomorrow. So I love that approach right there. So let's
Right.
go all the way back, right? You went through, your childhood and everything, right? But if you don't mind going a little bit deeper into that, like if I had went to high school with Alan Kay, what would my perception and
Ooh.
perspective be?
Man, I love that question, Elijah. I really do. If you were to, so in high school, I was a football player that that just was friends with everybody. I was very disciplined throughout the process. I did a lot of training. That's what initially got me into working out really assertively, is
Yes.
to get better in football. Like, I knew that but when I played football, that I wasn't as physically gifted or as strong as maybe the next person, but what I can make up for, or with the lack of genetics, I can make up for with hard work, and I can make up for kind of training. So I was out there just busting my tail off with agility drills, lifting.
Wow.
And then on top of that, I think that notion just kind of had people respect me in a certain dynamic, because I think amongst men, we definitely respect the hard work and the grind, the work ethic amongst everybody.
Yes.
And that carried over in a lot of other ways. But socially, man, I was just the nice guy. I was
Mm.
the be there for everyone, say jokes to everybody. I remember like there were times I tried to freestyle rap and try to battle rap and things like that. It didn't go very well at all, man. There's a reason why I podcast and I'm not like B Rabbit on 8 Mile or something. You know what I mean? Like, nah,
Yes.
nah,
Yes.
that didn't going. But no, I was a very social guy, definitely in a lot of different friend groups, but particularly a lot of the football players and the athletes who were the people that I was friends with.
Oh wow, that is nice. You definitely seem like the type that does a lot, in high school. Definitely, I would say everyone knows who Alan Kay, is or
Mm-hmm.
was back then. Then, with everything you just explained. Now, so as we're going, right, going through the whole childhood, you were once in the military, right? So you're a veteran. Thank you for your service, right? And I read a little bit of your bio. For you to be able to come out at the other end of everything, look at you with this amazing smile, amazing, energy, right? At what point did that switch occur to you? Like, at what point did you're like, you know what? I have ownership of my own life. I want to turn
Mm.
everything around. At what point? Like, what inspired that?
Right, right. I like, again, I love these questions, by the way. These are amazing. I gotta write these down for my own to ask.
Thank you.
But the moment that it really changed for me is actually about three and a half years ago during the lockdown for COVID.
Mm.
I had stumbled upon my foster paperwork. So as like I said earlier, I'm adopted.
Yes.
I went into foster care at 5, and then I eventually stayed with the parents that I have now. They adopted me, and I've kind of grown from that. But there's a lot. I don't want to say that there's like a lot of lost information, but there's definitely a lot of gray area for what I remember and the events that happened. But during COVID and during this time where we're just all locked down, we're kind of bored, I stumbled upon the paperwork that my mom had actually given me a few years prior. But, in that paper was a bunch of pictures, old things. But in one specific one, the one thing that changed my entire life
Mm-hmm.
was this binder. And this binder was actually all of the notes that the psych wrote down from when I had first got into foster care, dealing with all of the um, being taken away from my parents, being orphaned, being all those other things were documented, those
Yes.
notes over the years. And it was interesting for me because I saw the triggers that I saw in my 5-year-old, 6-year-old, 7-year-old self were the same triggers that I was still experiencing now. It was the same triggers that I had realized that I had never worked on. Now the trigger had transformed. The feeling of having the opportunity of being abandoned. I realized that now I exhibited those habits in other ways. The
Mm.
habits, like another thing that was in those notes were it noted the behaviors of my birth grandfather, my birth father, and they were degenerates, they were drinkers, they did all these things, they were womanizers. And to be really
Wow.
honest, like if I were to really look at my time during that time, I wasn't a shade off from what they were doing. Like the intention, in my opinion, were a lot different. I didn't have any, ill intention or malicious, kind of approach, but sometimes it kind of
Yes.
just happened that way,
Yes. Yes.
and I feel sometimes, like they say, the pathway to hell is paved with good intention. And sometimes, even though you have the right intention of doing things, they come out and they causes a negative instance. And so in that
Yes.
moment, and that's literally the whole thing of why Shift EQ happened. I realized that although I had a story of myself, I had a story of these adversity, of these things that happened to me. It was that moment that I was like, oh, those things did happen, but I don't have to become a victim of my own circumstance. I don't have to allow this to keep me into a low version of myself, especially when I know I'm destined to do more. And it was
Yes.
that moment that I'm like, you know what? Although this has happened, although this adversity happened to me, I'm going to own it and rewrite everything I'm supposed to do because of it.
Wow. Wow. Thank you very much for sharing that, Alan. Man, as you were talking, like, everything, how the shift AQ came about, you realizing that I actually have this problem right here, acknowledging that and then saying I have to rewrite every narrative.
Right, right.
That is just
Well,
inspiring.
let me kind of reframe that. It's not really like negatives or problems, right? They're all challenges
Yes,
that I
yes,
feel like a lot of us face, and
yes,
we have this opportunity to, if this is not how we want to show up, then let's change certain things. You know, I don't want it to. I think that we put too much weight on what's right and what's wrong, and it makes us feel a certain way, and when
yes,
once we start saying it's wrong, like, although I might be wrong for you, it might be not the way you want to do things, it might have you feeling bad about who you are. And sometimes, unless we actually observe ourselves and give ourselves the opportunity to change, we might act out
hmm
in a way that's the only way we know. And so I don't
yes,
want us to, ever get to a point where we're not given the space to be human, because, just saying right and wrong, it's all relative. We don't know what's right and wrong until we're taught what's right and wrong, and so therefore it's
yes,
like that.
yes.
So, but yeah.
No, no, I'm gonna go into that a little bit before I go into the question I have,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
You're absolutely right. There's the right or wrong is just, is relative, is based on whose perspective, right? There's this saying we have at DFB, and this philosophy we teach, where we're like, you don't make wrong or right decision, right? You just made a decision. When you make a decision, you don't know what's at the end of the decision you're about to make. You just made everything based on what is available to you, right? So every decision, every choice you've made in life is needed to bring you to where you are today. So if you didn't make it, where would you have been, right? And we're like, if you go back and you're like, oh, this is the best decision I ever made in my life. The same situation right now, you'll make a different decision.
Right.
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 So I love that perspective you have right there. That is just amazing and that is beautiful.
Thank you.
Wow. Wow. No, thank you for sharing. So you brought up about that inspired shift EQ,
Mm-hmm.
right? So not just, it wasn't just enough for you to just be like, you know what, I'm owning, the narrative of my life. I'm changing everything about my life. Okay, let me work on myself. But now you're trying to bring everyone along with you. So
Mm-hmm.
why trying to bring everyone along with you? Why, oh, let me take this to ShiftEQ podcast. Let me inspire the world.
Yeah, yeah. So this actually cascades on the story that I just told you about finding my adoption paperwork, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
so finding out my inner childhood traumas, figuring out where, all the other moments in my life where I could have become better, but realizing why it's become a trigger to where I'm at now. It's called inner child work, right? So
Mm.
are you familiar with inner child work by any chance, Elijah?
No, please explain.
Okay. So
No.
inner child work is just exactly that. It's because when we're adolescents, when we grow up, we as human beings and as creatures, we're learning about the world, and a lot of our intrinsic behaviors are programmed at a really early age. Like when we're like, for example, one of the phenomenons that's going on is like when kids act out, their parents give them a screen, they give them some kind of something. So now you see, now children, teenagers, and now older, every single time they feel nervous or feel a little bit anxious, they look at their phone, and it's like a program
Yeah.
to do that. The same thing happens when they do
Wow.
something wrong, and they're immediately yelled at, don't do this, don't do that. And that's kind of,
Yes.
the reason why when we say things are right and wrong and you tell someone that they're wrong, they just clench, they just,
Mm-hmm.
because they haven't worked through what right and wrong really means. And that's kind of inner child work.
Yes.
But to go along with that, so over the course of like maybe 2 years or so, a year and a half, 2 years, after I found that binder about myself, I then started training for a marathon. And then I started training for my very first bodybuilding competition, right? It was the OCB,
Yes.
November of 2021. And within about like a year span, I went from like 160, 100, almost 170 some odd pounds to, by the end of
Wow.
the year, completing a marathon and then doing my first natural physique competition at like 135, 134 pounds, like
Oh wow.
6% body fat. It was just like this crazy transformation. But
Yes.
I attribute, a lot of that of the drive of getting over my past traumas, the drive of this narrative that I created in my head and getting over these things. Now, when I got done with that, I'm like, wow, this is a high. This is great, right? I get to share this experience with other people. I inspired some people that are on my Facebook. old friends from the military, people that I used to play poker with. And when I started getting ready for my second competition, I decided to go to Tulum for my birthday, right? So,
Yes.
so I'm a February 22nd baby. And so 222 in the year 2022 fell on a Tuesday, and I was in Tulum, right? So
Wow.
so I'm just like, I'm throwing it out there. I'm like, universe, here's all the synchronicity. Ah, ha, ha, ha. Great,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So, but when I'm out there, my friend that I stay with, he goes, hey, my aunt's going to be here, right? He's like, she's going to be, she's cool. Don't worry. You guys will get along. Trust me. I'm like, all right, cool. So as soon as I get there, the lady's, name is Catherine, and we immediately hit it off with the conversation. It's like, oh, so, you seem like you're into fitness, where things like that. And I was like, oh yeah, and I tell her the exact same story I told you. I found my binder. I go through all this inner child work. And then she's like, oh, so that's inner child work, right? I'm like, yeah. You're aware of it. She's like, oh, of course I know about it. I'm like, okay. She's like, look my name up, right? I'm like, okay, who's so damn egotistical that they're going to tell me to look their name up when it comes to this?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So her name is Catherine Taylor. I look her up on Google, and I shit you not, she is one of the pioneers of inner child work. She has books from the early 90s that are all about the inner child workbook, the inner child this, inner child that. And it was just like, I felt like, again, like kind of like what I told you. I told the universe, yeah, let's make this alignment and see what happens. And the universe is like, I'm going to one up you, like everything that I had just transformed over. And at that time, I had just started ShiftEQ. At that time, I had just like kind of, I'm trying to figure out my voice, trying to figure out what my intention is and what I want to do with my brand. I know I have something there, but how do I create it that it serves the world? And spending that week in Tulum, and me and Catherine talking about, she talked about visions, she's talked about being in service, how the work that I did, she can tell that inspires other people to be better just by talking to her. She said she felt inspired by it. And it was even more kind of a full circle because it was her work that eventually brought me into her circle into this again.
Yes.
And then, we made a promise to each other that she'd work on her brand to spread out more, that she told me to promise her on what I wanted to do with my brand, especially with the podcast. And then it's kind of, I don't want to say like the history wrote itself, and not to make things really somber, but a couple of months later, she actually ended up dying. But I made this, it's interesting because she has a book that's called I Like You Better When You're Dead. And it's a book about how she lived with the idea that her brother died early, but her relationship with her brother became stronger after he died because of the way that she learned to appreciate him, the way that she learned to actually understand that he had. And what she loved about it is that carried over in her relationships in the present. And so, you might have lost someone, but think about all you can gain after you have to fill that void that they left. And she definitely instilled that. And being close to the woman that literally is the reason why I began my transformation, started taking ownership of my life. I owe it to her. I owe it to myself, and I owe it to anyone who identifies with the same triggers, to inspire them to become a better version. And it's so many different things, and then another thing, it's just as you step into that intention, you keep moving on. You have people such as yourself and your brand reaching out like, hey, let's do a podcast. We think they could serve, and it's just so gratifying, it's self-fulfilling, and it's almost like it's meant to be,
Yes. Wow, man. Alan, thank you very much for sharing that. The story with your auntie. She's definitely made a huge, significant impact in your life. I wrote down her name, Catherine Taylor. I'm definitely gonna look her up. Definitely gonna look at inner child. Even with the inner child, we kind of have a similar kind of philosophy or idea about that, but it's different, like you said, because as a kid, right? Their mind, their everything, right, is like a sponge. They learn, they see everything you do, they do, right? So, like for instance, for myself, growing up, I mean, even that is one of the stuff I'm doing right now myself. I'm definitely seeing a therapist for that, where it's like, okay, man, a lot of stuff as a kid. I had to block out some memories because that was
Yeah.
how, how bad it was. But yeah, we're like, okay, no, as a parent, we'll have to do it differently. No, don't yell at your kid, positive affirmations, all those stuff. So, no, thank you very much. I'm definitely going to look that up, right? And, you speak with so much passion and conviction. I it's very infectious. I love it. I sincerely love it, right? Just like the day we met at the Iron Man magazine bodybuilding show, right?
Right.
And instantly the energy just was just there, right? So you clearly have had impact in people's life, right, through this podcast. So as this podcast has been going, man, just let us know the amount of impact. Like, have people even reached out to you like, hey man, Alan, listen, your podcast, it did this to me, it saved me from this, it did that to me? Because I can tell, me personally, like, besides my business partner, but listening to that specific interview right there, I
Hmm.
was emotional. It was just emotional roller coaster for me. I was like,
Damn.
wow, you have a way of just bringing out that stuff from people to just open up to you. So yeah, if you don't mind sharing, man, how has your podcast impacted people that you've known and people around you?
Yeah, yeah. Again, thank you very much for that, and I appreciate that feedback. Man, that feels great. I think it's just like anything else. You go out, you put something out, whether it's a picture, whether it's a post or something, and it's constantly checking, how does this make me feel? Do I feel like I'm being authentic? Is there something I would like to change the next time I post something? And I think it's just that constant feedback loop of, is the message I'm trying to portray, is it actually being portrayed? Are my actions aligned with my vision? Is everything that I'm doing congruent with everything, that I'm doing? That's why I think brands and brand labels are so damn important, because it's
Yes.
like, because I when you see Shift EQ, I want you to think of the person. I want you to think about the habits, constantly thinking better of yourself. And if, like, I'm not doing that within myself, if I'm not being congruent with who I really am, and then I'm trying to tell you to be better, that doesn't make any sense whatsoever, you know.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
therefore it's just, I for me, I've realized, like, I feel like there's a lot of the younger generation that could use a better intuitive leadership, and
Yes.
being in the military, you see a lot of people that are put in charge, but they just, I'm a chief, so therefore you're gonna do this. And it's like,
Yes.
like one
Yes.
of the biggest things, right? Like, one of the biggest gripes and complaints I had about the military and incongruent leadership is when we used to do PT. And I think you're familiar with, wait, you were in the Marines, right? Or
Yeah, I'm still in
all
the
right, you're still
Marines.
in. All right, so
Yes.
you see Navy PT, right? And you see, like, the chiefs
Yes.
out there, they're freaking fat as hell, 240, 50, 60 pounds, doing arm circles because that's the only exercise they know. And you need to do this to be a chief. Like, you need to put your arms down and lift instead of eating so damn much,
Oh
and
man.
and
Yes.
it's seeing what incongruent leadership, incongruent people that are in charge, how it affects people's behavior towards the bigger picture. Like, yeah, they might get it done, but there's a lot of resistance that comes into it. And
Yes.
I have found that
Yes.
if you can become an embodiment of what you're passionate about, of who you really are as a person, and it enables people to become a better version, then it kind of, it behooves you to figure out how to compile that so that it does inspire people into a better vision, to a better version of themselves as well. And
Yes.
for me, over the progress of it, is just constantly checking with that process. How could this be better? How could this be better? How could this be better?
Mm-hmm,
Kind of like what you
mm-hmm.
said earlier. I used to do Zoom as well before, this Riverside app. But
Yes.
there's someone I interviewed who put me onto this, and then it's like, oh, this is the next step that I could do better. This is the
Mm-hmm.
next step that I can be better. Because
Yes.
although you guys see the version of me now, I would challenge you guys to go back to my very first podcast, and it's just like, oh my god, that is what? Like, I cringe so much, and I'm just like, oh
Yes.
my god, I
Yes.
really did that, and I
Oh.
really published that. But that's where it begins, that's where it
Yes,
starts.
yes. No, I mean, like you said, the very first podcast. I think you and I had the conversation. I was like, our very first podcast, myself and Sai, it was a phone call. Like, I was on the
Oh.
phone. He was on the phone, and if you listen to the same thing, and like you say, just fine tuning the process, right? That I mean, just read this book, Atomic Habits. That's what it
Oh
says,
my
right? It's
God,
like
that is such a
great
phenomenal
book.
book.
Oh my goodness, amazing book, right? And it
Right.
just talks about the system, right? It's not so much about the goal, but it's the system that drives it, that keeps you playing. It says, the system makes you, it keeps you keep playing the game even after when you win, right? But the goal just takes you to the game. So that is what everything is, right?
Thank you so much for watching our videos. If you have any questions about the topic that was discussed today, or you have topic suggestions, don't be shy. Comment down below. Let us know.